Are we set, Celeste?
1 second, please. Okay, you're all set.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. It's, I think, around 6:34 p.m. And as usual, the very first thing is a time for public comment. We may have one public, somebody whose phone number ends in the digits 994.
Isn't that our newspaper guy?
I don't know. Anyway, if you are not on screen and you do have a comment, I just ask you to unmute yourself and you can go ahead and make your comment. Seeing none, however, let's go to our review of the board. Oh, hello?
Hello, yes, this is Laura Brown. I teach first grade at Floodbrook School. Good evening, board members. As you may be aware, negotiations over the next statewide health insurance agreement for Vermont's public school employees have begun. I'm here to speak in support of the union's bargaining goals of equity, affordability, accessibility, and quality in healthcare. Since January, my health costs have affected my net pay so much so that I was taking home the same amount as I did last year.
I'm having trouble hearing this person.
So am I. Could you maybe be closer to the receiver or something?
Can you not hear me?
Not well.
Not well. Okay. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm very close to the receiver right now.
You were cutting in and out a bit.
Okay. Maybe I'm in Londonderry, so that may be why.
Well, just stay as close as you can and give it another try, please.
Okay. So, as you may be aware, negotiations over the next statewide health insurance agreement for Vermont's public school employees have begun. I'm here to ask for your support of the union's bargaining goals of equity, affordability, accessibility, and quality in healthcare. Since January, my health costs have affected my net pay so much so that I'm taking home the same amount as I did the year before. I have scleroderma, so I cannot afford to neglect my health or take a less than premium version of health insurance. If something were to happen to my health, I need to know that I can afford all possible solutions. We need your help in supporting S-120, a bill that would create a joint healthcare affordability study commission so that we can make sure that we are attracting and keeping the best possible candidates for teachers in the state of Vermont. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay. Thank you. I think Jim Salzgiver may be commenting on that later in the meeting. Do I have that number right, Jim? You're muted.
S-120 was not on my list.
Okay, sorry.
But we have commented in the last meeting, I think if you look in the minutes, on striking out a position that was articulated by the SV, Vermont Boards Association, that insisted that whatever solution is provided, that every participant remain whole in moving forward.
Well, that was H81, and actually at the request of the NEA, they took away something. They changed it so they don't have to be equal for all parties.
Okay.
I brought that up just because the person who just spoke might have wanted to stay around if there was going to be further comment about this per the agenda anyway.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm going to have to take a look at S-120. That wasn't really, we discussed healthcare bargaining earlier in the year, but that's already been passed. So I'll take a look at S-120.
Thank you.
Great.
Are there any other? Thank you, Ms. Brown. Did you want to say something else, Ms. Brown?
No, thank you very much for being here.
All right, well, thank you. Are there any other public comments? All right. So could the vice chair help us review the board goals?
Goal number 1, governance. The board will implement a governance model that looks to the future and fosters a high level of effectiveness and efficiency. Goal 2, community engagement. The board will use a proactive approach to community engagement. Goal 3, equity. The board will use their operational definition of equity as an overarching guide in policy development and in decision-making. Goal 4, the legislative action group. The board will keep abreast of legislative issues and take action when needed to support the district.
Thank you, Dick. Before we get into the consent agenda, just one kind of housekeeping matter. I missed a few hands at the last meeting, and part of that is my inattention, but part of it also is that some of you are sitting in places where if you raise your hand, it's very difficult for me to see it. I would just suggest that you might try raising your hand right now and see whether you can see your own hand on your own screen, because if you can't, that's a bad sign. Great. Okay. All right, we have 2 items on the consent agenda. One is the minutes of the last meeting.
Move the consent agenda.
Thank you. Consent agenda moved by Dick. Is there a second? Seconded by Melanie. All right. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining? Thank you. That passes unanimously. And we can go
with respect to the policy, with respect to the next item, the policy committee minutes, if the practice in the past has been that the committee itself actually approves the minutes, and that the only reason that it happens to be here is so that the rest of the board is aware that a meeting occurred and what transpired.
Yeah, that's correct. So the only thing we would do under that item is if anybody has any questions for the policy committee about what the minutes mean or what they did at their last meeting, I guess this would be the appropriate time to ask them. But we don't approve committee minutes.
We were going over this. I just want to check in. One of the things that Celeste and I were talking about as we looked in the past was that the committee within the meeting approved the minutes just so they could be posted. So only those committee members would vote on it, but that way we're able to move forward with posting them and making them public sooner.
Okay.
Well, I guess we could do that for you.
As a person on the policy committee, I move the acceptance of the minutes.
Okay. All right. And somebody else on the policy committee should second that. I see Melanie's hand. Okay. And again, this is just a vote by those of us who are policy committee members, not the rest of us. All in favor, please raise your hand.
It's unanimous.
Good. Okay. Anything else on that topic? For example, any questions about those minutes or questions for the committee? Not seeing any. Okay. So let's go to the ends policy, the community engagement survey, and I'm pretty much going to turn the show over to John at this point. And John, you're muted still.
Apologize about that. So if you could go, I'm going to share my screen, and if you could go to this document that I shared and I sent out prior to the meeting, and I put it in the chat. So is anyone not on this document? Okay. So here's what we're going to do to start with. I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to just review what the procedure is and just read the first 2 pages and kind of see what we're going to be doing. And So give it a few minutes to see, and also read, each board member has a job to do in their breakout room. And just to give you a little context, this was an activity that was created initially by with the community outreach group, community engagement group, and then we refined it with the executive team last week. And so why don't we do this? Why don't we, so I know when you're done, give you a couple minutes, turn off your screens right now. And when you've read through it after a couple minutes, turn them back on. So I know that you're good to go.
And what you want folks to read is pretty much what's on the first page in terms of
The first two pages are going to be the most relevant right now.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I can't.
Dick, are you having trouble with part of this?
No, you
Okay.
said to redo as soon as we read it and understood it, that we come back.
Yeah. I heard sighing over there. I didn't know if you were sighing because you were.
No, I was stuck because I've got two different agendas and three computers going at the same time, and not everything is the same.
That is, that's confusing. That's frustrating.
I'm the reporter, and I'm supposed to somehow write up the recommendations tonight. That will be a little hard for me to do.
I will say,
No.
I think that with the way that John has laid this out with this, 10, 20, 10, 15-minute thing, I'm hoping, I feel pretty confident that leaves the time necessary to help get that done. And I would assume, and maybe I'm like jumping ahead of this, but I'm guessing that the reporting out is a few statements of general ideas, not necessarily like.
Well, I agree, but I read the whole thing. I can't find the purple document, so I can't write in the purple document.
Does your file scroll down?
No, the problem is that I'm on a tablet and I haven't loaded up John's document on my computer, because I loaded up the entire agenda on the document. I could probably load it up and then enter stuff, but
I bet you can.
Mine says, even though I'm trying to come back, I have a message that says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it.
Did the host look into that?
well,
Maybe you can just you're in our group. You can take your notes the old fashioned way with a pencil and a paper.
Okay, now I've got a message.
About how to enter.
No, now it said that I could start it.
All right. So
Thank
we
you.
get everyone back. we can do this. We got this.
Yeah.
We'll get everyone back here, and I'll answer any questions you have. So,
can I have till tomorrow to synthesize and summarize what I'm supposed to report?
No.
No.
You could always,
let-
why don't you,
Let me explain. Let me explain.
Let
I'm
me
gonna say
make
no.
let me make a
Let me
suggestion
explain.
about how Dick can handle this. How about if Dick and let's say
Alex?
somebody else in his group switch positions so that Dick does not have to use the purple table?
So yeah, Dick won't be doing that anyway. It's not his job. He's the reporter, not the recorder. So
And our recorder is absent. Lee isn't here, so maybe Jeff could do.
yeah,
our-
you guys can figure that out in your
Yeah.
group, and I'm confident that we got this because we'll be good. All right, so let me explain. So the idea is that we have all this. The big idea here is we have all this data. Now we're going to distill the themes a little bit more, and then we will use this distillation it will inform the work of the community engagement group somehow to distill it further. And you guys will help decide that work. So you're going to go into breakout rooms in a little bit, and the first thing you're going to do is this step 1, and you're going to review. There's a link here, and review what you guys, your reflection results from the last meeting on the first community engagement activity. You can see what everyone else said, and then you're going to each have a couple minutes to discuss that, and then elaborate on the themes that you put on. Now, if you scroll to the bottom of the document, I've took all the work you did on, leading up to this, and I organized it by your breakout groups. So you can just have to look at one place to see. So breakout group 1, this is here, all the themes from your group members. Now, if you see here, the color coding, if you remember back before, you each did a different section. So every person in the group will do a different section. There's a couple overlaps. So the idea here is that you're going to just discuss your themes a little bit, and then you're going to start to synthesize your themes and distill them into 10 to 20. Now, if you are the recorder, your job, and if someone's not there, someone else can do it, is to find your breakout group table, the purple table. You can look for your name, and then you're gonna have to agree and put your list of 10 to 20 themes in the left-hand column. And so essentially there shouldn't be any overlap here. They should kind of try to avoid overlap. They should be distinct.
Mhm.
And then, so the recorder is going to do that. And then, and I'll bounce around, make sure there's no technical difficulties or anything that's unclear.
Mhm.
And then you're going to, the next thing, step 3, is you're going to come up with some guidance and recommendations for the community engagement meeting as far as what next steps are. And you're going to put that also in the purple table. Then we'll all come back together and we will discuss, we'll have some discussion and further synthesize any findings and distill any feedback for the community engagement. But don't strive for perfection here about making a perfect distillation. Just get down your thoughts and ideas, and that will be the job of the community engagement working group to further distill this. And the purpose of this is to help inform our work and for you to inform our work.
Can I add? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
I was going to add something, just what you were saying, that the purpose of this will be to inform our global ends policy, and that the purpose of that is to identify the essential benefit that we provide to students. What is the good that they gain from us that influences their lives? So it's student focused. What benefit are we? What among all these values? What do we provide for them? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you, Deb, for keep reminding us of the big picture of why we're doing all this. So I'm going to open up those breakout rooms. We're going to breakout group number 1 is going to stay in the main session, and which will be streaming. The other breakout groups will not. But I'll bounce around and answer any questions. I'm going to open the rooms. You should be able to join. If you cannot, or if you're put in the wrong room, let me know.
So John, just so you know, breakout room 3 is the one that's staying in the meeting. Unless you did
No, I
something.
changed it. I changed it.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah, and I changed the names and everything.
That's fine.
Okay, and each group has a facilitator too. So, and I think Ben, you're for the main session.
Yes. So we are getting downward. We're essentially, it looks like everybody who's on camera now is our group minus John. So I'll just get us started. And we've already had a pretty good introduction to the whole process through this. So I guess I'll just sort of like quickly ask if there's anybody feels like they need any clarification on roles or process that have come up in that introduction. Great. Sam, do you have something to say, or are you all set? Okay. I'm sorry. I thought you were trying to say something. So first of all, just launching into this, I just, I am in the community engagement committee or subgroup, but I'm really glad that we have this chance to talk as a smaller group of, out of the whole board, and really just to hear what stood out for folks in reading through all these responses. One of the things that I've been feeling like as a board member is that we don't necessarily, especially with working on Zoom and COVID, is that we don't get a whole lot of opportunity to get to know one another as board members and sort of see what strikes us as being important in what's happening in the world and what strikes us as being or interesting or compelling or whatever it is. So there's a little bit of a chance in this work to share a little bit of ourselves in a sense, by way of saying, what stood out for you and what really resonated for you in reading through these things. And then through that, we might learn a little bit about each other and what makes us tick as board members, what drives us. So our first task is to spend about 15 minutes and probably a little less I'm guessing given the time frame of having the introductions and all that, but to allow each of us to just talk for a couple of minutes about what stood out in reading through all the responses, and then we'll move into themes. So I would love to just give each of us a minute, a sort of solid minute, just to share a few of the standout responses that really resonated for you. And we had on the pre-work was sort of 4 sections. One was a response that really made you think differently, one that really resonated for you, and something that you really made you think about thematic elements of this. Then there was an optional add-on. So I'd like to just let each person talk for a minute, and then we'll just we can respond to one another in terms of what comes up for us in hearing what stood out for each of us. So if that makes sense, if there's somebody who would like to start first, we can just go in around, so I don't know if anybody's feeling like they want to be brave and share their responses first. Herb, why don't you go ahead?
I'll go first. What struck me was that some of the things that were most often mentioned are things that I think are very difficult to do via remote learning. For example, empathy, kindness, compassion, care for others. I mean, it's not totally unrelated to people appearing on screen. But I'd be interested to see what Sam thinks about this. But I think it's pretty hard to really cultivate those things if all you're doing is meeting remotely. And likewise, the third most important thing I think I found was social skills. Again, a problem if all you're doing is on a screen. And even respect. I mean, yeah, we can try to be respectful to each other's on screen, but it's the opportunities are different if you're in person.
To respond quickly, I definitely think, like, especially when I was fully remote, in this past spring, the only time I had to talk with other kids was in breakout rooms in my Spanish class when he wanted us speaking to just practice fluency. And I can't imagine, I feel lucky to be going through this in high school when, like, I feel like I have developed most of my kindness and empathy skills, hopefully. But yeah, I think it's definitely harder to teach those things over a screen when there's no face-to-face interactions. Should I go while I'm unmuted? Well, I
I'm
thought,
gonna leave 1 second. I'm sorry. You're gonna, Sam, one thing. If you guys want, would it help if you can share your screen at any time for when you're editing the doc?
oh,
That may help when it comes time to do the
I
thematic.
just want to know. So Herb, I'm gonna make sure to give everyone the ability to share their screen if they want to. So I said that.
Sure,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Sam.
the thing that one of the common themes that I thought was interesting and smart was when people were talking about, like, just teaching kids how to learn and stay curious and ask the right questions, because, like, you'll learn facts, but knowing how to do the research and how to find things that you're interested in and pursue those, I feel like it's one of the most valuable parts of school. I agreed with that, and I thought that was a good insight. And also all the resources provided between food and extra help. I thought that was an important theme as well. And that, again, going off of what Herb was saying, is very hard to provide in a remote setting.
Thanks, Sam. Jim, I saw that you had something that you wanted to say. I don't know if that moment is past, or if you wanted to speak next.
No, I have to, yeah, that's not relevant. Yeah, I had, it's a little hard to do in a short period of time. When we had the last time around, I ended up with 3 pages of notes on what I thought was interesting. And one thing that I found very interesting was looking at the difference between the students who responded and their responses versus parents and community members. Although, honestly, the content of those, there was a heck of a lot of overlap, because there are, basic themes to me that, you get the K-8 student, a safe and nurturing place for students to learn, emotional growth, social interactions, preparation for the future. And, you see some of these themes across all of them. But to me, honestly, it was just the responses in there. I spent a lot of time, and so many of them were so well thought out, and, provided a heck of a lot of, I didn't have any problem finding a full 20 themes, but because there's a heck of a lot of material in there, I was kind of blown away by the response that we had from the community. So rather than take too much time now, I'm the recorder, so I'm supposed to be writing this stuff down soon. So I want to leave more time for when we get together and discuss each what we put down.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it is, I think that part of this is just to sort of, there's no way. I also have pages of notes of different, and numbered, responses that something stuck out to me, and there's no way to capture all that. But it is interesting to hear, some of these things that stood out. Lindsay, would you like to share?
So I did not see the assignment to do my number ones, but I did look at them and go through them. And I guess some of the questions I was just reading when I was going through them was I was just wondering if people were responding a certain way because of how different school has been this year and what they really want, versus if this had never happened, if we would be getting different responses. So that was kind of the question, you know, when I was reading some of them, just wondering, is this because of the situation we're in now and people are looking for things under the assumption that maybe this is how things are going to go in the future, versus if this was pandemic or pre-pandemic, we would get some of these responses. So I don't have like my specific of the numbers that I was supposed to do, but I did, you know, go through majority of them, but I did not write down notes. So I apologize for that.
Well, I mean, Jim, go ahead.
No, just as kind of a follow-on on that, you know, I marked down, there were a number that were sort of critical and some critical because of the situation, how it was being dealt with. And there are others that were just more generally critical. I found that I didn't think that many focused on, you know, the current situation. I think a lot more we're trying to be kind of open-minded as to what education should be about. But I wondered to what extent it made sense for us as a board to be focusing on some of those criticisms. And to kind of, you know, that's not important necessarily for this exercise when we're trying to find, you know, come up with ends policies, but I think maybe it makes sense as a board to kind of try to make sure we recognize that there were some of those criticisms and questions, you know, and we get back to that. I think that might be a good later effort.
I think that's a great takeaway point, Jim. I think that is really important. And as I think our charge here is to try to synthesize out thematically what broadly does our community want from our schools and for all our children, as our phrasing goes. So the few outliers don't necessarily skew those broad themes, but they are still really important because those represent voices in the community, and maybe some that are people are willing to speak up where others are not. So it's so I think that point's really valid. And Lindsay, I wanted to follow on your thinking a little bit too, because I had really similar thoughts about the specific timing of when we sent the survey out was in January, just a couple of weeks after the Capitol insurrection, and a really challenging time in our country, and you know, obviously in a year into a pandemic, and there's no way that did not affect what people wrote. You know, I really think we would be foolish to think otherwise. But the part of what I was questioning is that, you know, that does that, you know, is, you know, I guess it's sort of like just being aware of that and seeing that what came out of that was that I saw just so many people talking about the importance of civic engagement, and sort of not necessarily in this terms, but morality. Of you know, I think like, and a lot of talk about sort of social emotional skills and you know, sort of compassion and communication and all these things that are really important. So, you know, one of the I guess one pullout that I had was, you know, an aspirational one was somebody saying, I hope they learn to be citizens of the world, to practice kindness, empathy, critical thinking, and above all, confidence that each child can achieve their dreams, along with the support structure to help them do this. And, you know, I think that a couple of years ago, that answer might've been different, you know, for people. So I think, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's less important now. So, Herb, yes. You're muted, Herb. Sorry.
I was so intent on watching the stopwatch, I forgot I was muted. We're into about 14 minutes here. Just really quickly, a couple of things. I agree with Lindsay, and several of the responses I read actually were clearly having to do with the pandemic, and because several were that way. It's hard to tell whether maybe some others which didn't identify the pandemic were still in response to it. It's just, we don't know. And following up on what Jim said, I actually kept track of which group the people answering the questions were part of, and I noticed the same thing. And we're now at, whoops.
Well, we're at a transition point for sure. In that, we've each had a chance to speak briefly about some of the things that stood out for us in terms of specific pullouts for responses. And it would be great to even though we could spend our full hour, I think, on this, just pulling out different things and getting people's different interpretations of it. But in the sort of the case of this work, we should shift to themes. So our next task is to try to make sense and synthesize 10 to 20 themes out of the different lists that we came up with. So Lindsay, yes, question?
I am the reporter, and I know that Jim is the recorder. So am I writing this down, or is Jim writing it down and I'm reading off of what he's writing down?
So you're going to be tasked with just sharing out some of our takeaways from this. So we're going to share out some of the. I guess I'm going to read through what it's going to be at the end.
Because we're supposed to list 10 to 20 themes. So I didn't know if Jim was doing that, and then I'm reading what he writes into the purple.
I think I'm supposed to put it on the shared screen, which also means that I'm going to have that open while we're discussing. It's going to be hard for me I don't have 3 screens right now. So I'm going to probably be sort of in the background or something. I don't know. I'll try to figure it out.
Jim, you don't have to worry about sharing your screen. You can just, right into that purple box down on,
right.
your page.
But if I have the purple box open, it's hard for me to also have all the responses open and to have the everybody on screen at the same time. So
yeah,
I kind of got it's.
So I think Jim, what your role will be in this is to, as I can share up the responses that we already have, which was on the final page of this. So we've got our group responses, and we will verbally as a group now talk through and try to condense that, synthesize that into a list that you can write down. And Lindsay, you're going to be just sharing out our sort of like the overall takeaways out of the whole group. We're not going to have time to, I don't think, to go through all of our different themes. We'll probably show them all up, but that's really going to be the work of the community engagement group later on to try to narrow all those lists down. We won't try to do that to a whole group today. So you're really just sort of reporting out on the process, and we'll visually be able to share out what we write up. So I'm going to see if I can share this, which is these are our themes here that we came up with. And is that at a reasonable size for you all to see on your screen? And can I zoom in or out?
It's fine with me. I printed it out.
Okay. So this is, I think in some ways, this is the trickiest part, is for us to try to, as a group, synthesize a long list of really important things. So I think maybe what might help Jim in this process as recording this would be that if we just look at this document for a minute, and then just when you have a theme that you seeing in a couple of different places, raise your hand or speak out into the group if it's quiet, and share what that theme is that you're seeing.
Okay. Ben, if you could make it a little bit bigger, that'd be helpful, because I'm trying to split screen and kind of so I could write stuff down too.
Yep. Oops, excuse me. That's not my Zoom. How's that?
A little better.
I can go even bigger.
Maybe one, yeah, we'll go to 150. Let's try that. Okay, good.
Okay. So for example, I'm seeing critical thinking, analytical thinking versus just learning facts popping up for a couple of people here in 3 different places. So critical thinking definitely is something that's coming up. And then there's lots of other people put different follow-on things to that.
I'm also seeing a lot of skills, social skills, life skills. I don't know if, Ben, you have life skills and social skills, and then somebody in the yellow herb has social skills, and then there was another skills somewhere else. I think Samantha had social skills too. So I don't know if life and social skills would be a theme.
I was kind of, let's see, am I on mute or anything, or let's see. Having a hard time.
We can hear you.
Okay, you can't hear me. Okay.
Yes.
I was, I kind of broke social skills. I tended to see a lot with, that was the social emotional learning, interpersonal skills, respect for others as one category, which I took as very different than on the life skills. I was seeing a whole lot in there about meaning real life skills like how to live, being able to do finances and shop and do, I was saying, a variety of people saying, basic life skills or something that we should be teaching. So that the life skills I was kind of tying more into a lot of people saying we should prepare kids for all different alternative futures beyond just college. So I was kind of tying those 2 together.
Yeah, I think just to further synthesize that, and then Herb, I do see you. I think that life skills piece, I wrote introduction to trades, but other skills needed for the real world. I definitely saw a number of different cases where that popped up. People talking about basic math, not high, like we don't need, this fancy highfalutin math. We need to learn how to balance a checkbook and fill out a tax form and, interpret data, like stop. But then these other lifelong, there are other life skills, social skills that really resonated as a different piece. And I apologize. I also just, Herb, you go next, but I apologize. The screen keeps moving, and I think it's because people are editing the document elsewhere. So I can't control that. So I'm sorry if it jiggles on you. Go ahead, Herb.
So I just think that we should record both life skills and social skills separately, because as the 2 of you have pointed out, they aren't the same thing necessarily. While I'm unmuted, how about communication, which doesn't, it overlaps them, but it's more specific too.
That was a biggie that I saw a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I found it kind of interesting that, on some of them, they were talking about communication, with peers, but also with adults and people of different age groups and all that, which was kind of an interesting. But I think the written and oral communication skills, maybe.
Yeah, and I would broaden it too. There's, the visual through the arts, video, social media. I mean, there's like that sort of literacy writ large, literacy and communication, I think is, I definitely heard and saw that in a lot of places. Herb, and then I'd love to see if Lindsay, if you've got something that you want to add to.
The surveys I looked at seemed mostly to differentiate between communication and the ability to view sources critically. A lot of them mentioned under critical thinking or some other heading, getting bombarded with all sorts of electronic information and figuring out what's actually worth paying attention to. And that's not necessarily the same thing as communication. So I think that ought to be two different items.
Mm-hmm. Sam?
Going off of what Jim was talking about, like exposure to different, like communicating with different age groups and teachers and everything. But I think that also goes into 11 and yours, Ben, like exposure to diversity. And I see that, I've seen that a few times, but I think that's a common theme as well.
I agree.
Wait, so how would we put that? I'm sorry, I'm kind of trying to type in. So say, give me that again.
Could we
Boil it
call
down.
it, could we call it respect for diversity?
Okay.
And I think there's respect for diversity, which I think is thematically, I think is accurate. But I did want to sort of like pull on that a little bit, because there's an element of exposure to diversity that I feel like I saw, but I'm sort of like putting that out there to you to see if you saw that as well, because I know this is a lens that I already looked through, so I may have been looking for it. But broadening the scope of what we're presenting in schools, sort of shifting the narrative of sort of like how we look at history and how we look at current events and that. I'm sort of
you're
curious.
thinking kind of like openness and engagement with diversity in a way,
Mm-hmm.
something like, because it's, instead of just respecting, it's actually, finding, it's a huge plus to be able to be exposed to diversity and learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Herb, I see your hand. But Lindsay, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in if you wanted to.
Oh, Herb could speak first and then I can say something afterwards.
Just a quick follow-up on diversity then. A number of my surveys mentioned global awareness, and that may or may not have to do with diversity. I'm not sure, because the people that wrote that may have meant that you need to be aware of all kinds of differences all over the world, or it might just have been more in terms of, I don't know, geography or something. I like to think it's the former, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, as an FYI, if I'm just kind of popping in, I generally don't have you guys on screen because I have the other one open where I'm trying to write down this stuff. So if I just kind of blurt things out, apologies. But I say civics was one that I saw a whole lot. How to be involved in civics, citizenship, engaging in communities.
I'm just going to interrupt. I'm going to put you guys on the clock here a little bit. 8 minutes to get as many as you can. You gotta, as many themes as we can on this in your purple table.
Okay, John, is that 8 minutes till we're coming back to the full group, or 8
No,
minutes?
8 minutes till you move on to the next step, to step number 3.
Yep, we're in a good place. Thanks.
Okay, let me just toss out one of the things that the one that I had as my number one. So I saw it so much, and I'm seeing it in a lot of other people's, the love of learning, and really, it's lifelong learning, learning how to learn, that sort of stuff. Did that strike other people as a biggie?
Yeah, I definitely saw that. I'm seeing Sam nodding too. I just highlighted one Sam put in: teach kids how to enjoy learning and stay curious, asking questions. Jim, you had learn to learn and love learning. And I had something about lifelong learning skills and habits. And I think that was all
I agree.
curiosity and desire to learn. Herb had as well.
Okay.
It's funny because so many of my teachers, whenever they talk about teaching us, they say, like, they always reiterate, they want us to know what we learned in their class, but their main goal is to teach us how to continue to learn after their class and like keep on asking questions and know how to find information that we want to find.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yeah, and yeah.
go ahead.
Excuse me.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to follow up on. I don't know if you got down as a theme, Jim, the civics and citizenship, but I definitely that.
Yep. Well,
that
so
really-
far I've got 7 critical, really kind of in short form: critical thinking, social skills, life skills, communication, diversity, civics, and love of learning, and lifelong learning. So I was thinking about, there was a whole lot of, so many of them were into, preparation. This kind of fits in with the life skills in a way, but, the preparation for the future, whatever that may be, and ensuring that, it doesn't have to just be college. We're preparing kids for whatever their next step is.
Mm-hmm.
So how?
Yeah, I think there's a shifting, the shifting sense. I think it's tied to that civics and community engagement. It is a shifting sense that college is the only pathway that school is preparing students for. That we need to not just make other pathways viable, but to value them. That going into the trades, it may well have as much, if not more, value than getting a college degree. And we need people with those skills in our society just as much as we need people to be lawyers. So it's I don't know how much of that is like my own lens, but I think I saw that in the comments on life skills and preparation for what's next, whatever is next. That really resonated.
And I saw that a lot. I just put down prepare students for all possible next steps, not just college. Does that cover?
Yeah.
People like that, or is there better?
That's good.
Like it.
Herb?
Sort of a subcategory of life skills, but it's also a subcategory of social skills. A lot of folks mentioned collaboration or cooperation. And I mentioned that because that's also something that's pretty difficult to teach remotely. And I wonder whether it needs to be in there on its own.
I think that's good on its own.
Yeah, I would agree. I want to poke at the, Sam, you have right at the top of your list, resources that they might not have at home, food, counseling, etc. And I'm just sort of curious what people's reaction is to that, or what they saw in their own sections.
Or I can add on, I guess that is less about education and more about school itself. But I feel like I saw that a decent amount just because school is so much more than the education. It's also providing this community that helps students to further their education, but it's not directly teaching them. It's helping them so they can become better.
That's an interesting one. I think it also, I maybe kind of a little sort of a split from that, but one that I saw a lot that I was kind of interested to see and I hadn't thought of before was safe environment. Just a whole lot of people who were, students, parents, etc. that, safe and, as one student said, a safe and nurturing place for students to learn.
Yeah, I saw that too.
Yeah. I think community and broad, and that's a big broader umbrella to that. But a nurture, a sort of a healthy learning community, if you will, to include, schools help, by providing food, by providing counseling, by providing, nurturing relationships, we're providing a sense of community and where kids can learn. So I don't know what that exactly how that is, but that's getting at a little bit of I'm trying to get at a little bit what Sam was noting there. And then also this idea that, that's really valuable in our schools, that they're safe places, but they're, safe to be, and they're challenging to learn in, in the sense like, as a teacher, like you don't necessarily always want to create safe spaces. You want to create spaces where people can stretch themselves and learn and grow. And those don't always, they don't always feel safe, but that, it's a stretching of that. So, but that may just be too much semantics.
I think we're just about at our time limit here.
Thank you, timekeeper.
I've got 11 items down. If you scroll down, then you could probably get to where I've been writing things down. Ben? Hopefully it'll be on your
I gotta go
screen.
back up. Yep, I just gotta get back up.
Or
here.
back up, right, okay.
Yep.
So there's
the one other that I saw, and I want to sort of give a chance to, if you've got one other after looking at this, but my one other that I would add would be something about sort of moral and ethical, not teaching, because but I guess it's creating space to develop, ethics and morality. I don't know how to short that.
I found it too.
I think that's a good one. Yeah.
Anybody else have one other before we switch over to our next phase?
Well, I had a number of comments about, some people called it fortitude, some said resilience, some said perseverance. Some talked about the opportunity to try, fail, and then try again successfully. Perseverance, whatever you want to call it.
I like that.
Learner's mindset, as they say. Sam, did you have anything else that you wanted to add in?
I don't think so. I think we have a pretty good list.
Great. Lindsay, is there anything you would want to add to this list? I know you just had to pop out, so sorry for getting you, but.
Sorry. No, I think we've kind of hit on, at least with the stuff that we have, some good themes here. Great.
Well, so this next phase is really just sort of like, what do we do next? And, generating out of this group, what you think would be some good process steps for both, for the community engagement group, and then also thinking ahead to our June meetings, as we, sort of work to try to move this into an ends policy. That's our ultimate goal to this. So any thoughts on suggestions of what might be good process steps for the community engagement, or for the community engagement group? Herb, please.
I don't know how many folks kept the sort of detailed notes that I guess you and I and Jim did, but it might be useful to reflect some on the different things that different groups tended to list. I agree that there were a lot of overlap, but I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head what, for example, was mentioned a lot more by school employees than was mentioned by community members, but there were some pretty significant differences. That's not to say that we should disregard some group when we're trying to figure out what our ends are, but maybe we have to go back to some of those groups, or at least representatives of them, and try to figure out why there's these differences.
Mm-hmm. That's a great suggestion. I think that we definitely could dive in a little bit to the responses based on respondent.
Oops.
By the way, one thing I found puzzling there is often the responder seemed to fit into multiple categories that couldn't all be the same person. And I was wondering whether people got confused about that, because you'll have one responder that lists both student and parent.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at that, and actually I think that it was, some of those were parents who had been students in the system. That was my take on it, kind of looking at it. And so
Maybe that's it.
That would have been my guess. If not an error, then that would have been, yeah.
should I throw down the idea we talked about before, which is capture the criticisms to make sure that we have a chance to address those at some point?
I think that's a great suggestion. Yeah.
I'm closing the breakout rooms in 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Yep.
So in terms of we'll come out of this process tonight with 3 different lists of themes. So I would think, one of the goals for the community engagement group would be to take those 3 lists and make one list, at least do that before the next meeting.
Yeah.
And I don't know, those of you who've been at this for a lot longer than I have and came up with the first, our ends policy right now is somewhat of a placeholder, but it didn't come out of thin air. And I'm curious whether there was work done to look at a variety of other ends policies that are out there, and whether that would be worthwhile, for reference, or whether we've already done that work and have something to look at.
Well,
yeah, or Jim.
I think it would be worth doing that. I'm not sure that we actually looked at more than maybe 3. I think we looked at Winooski, one other district in Vermont, and then there may have been a model one we got from somewhere. But what I would suggest is that the community engagement group not look at those until it's come up with something on its own, and then compare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was thinking. Go ahead, Jim.
Now, just to kind of give you the background of, we were separate districts back then. So at Dorset, we worked really hard we got like 100 people from the community in a room, showed them a couple of movies about what education is all about, kind of TED Talk type things, and then had everybody was at their own tables and wrote down ideas on the tablecloth, the paper tablecloth. And we pulled all that together. So it was a similar process of community engagement, that then it was boil down to get to the point of, what are the real key themes? Pretty much like this process.
Great. Yeah, and I think, my sense is, having, looked at our temporary ends policy over the last year or so, that it's pretty good. It's not bad, and it's I think the structure of it works. But I'm just curious if I think we'll fall into using that same structure unless we have an idea of there are other structures out there that could help us. So that's a little bit what I was thinking. Herb?
I'm wondering, maybe not as part of the policy, but as something that the public would see if they looked at the policies, to write some sort of a disclaimer saying what this isn't, because I got so many responses that said math, science, history, reading, writing, so forth and so on. And people are going to wonder, gee, how come that doesn't show up in your ends policies? And I don't think it should, but people are going to wonder why.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We always try to do the academics sort of, you know, as a big category.
And I think that's, you know, like part of this is also, I think, and this may be part of what we can do in the June meeting, is think about what are the, because we're going to boil this down so far that, you know, we're, you know, it's at the point where it could easily not mean anything unless we sort of define out what we mean by these pieces. So there may be some work to be done in that. When we say, you know, we want all students, you know, all our students to, you know, thrive in a, you know, be exposed to a, you know, academically challenging curriculum and, you know, develop social skills and whatever, but to define out what the, you know, academics look like or transferable skills look like, you know, what are those pieces? Some of that work is our work as a board, but some of that is obviously work that's done by, you know, Randy and in the schools to say what, you know, how they define those things. And we're, you know, we're really at the big 10,000 foot level. But the accountability comes through in that clarity that, you know, the people in schools actually provide with that. So
I'm going to close these rooms now, just to let you know.
Okay, and unfortunately, legislators and the Agency of Education and everybody around.
There are things like EQS and all sorts of other standards that we have to meet. Yes.
Yeah, those unfortunate things.
Yeah.
Education has many masters. Yes.
Absolutely.
Good process.
Well,
Ben, if you could stop. Oh, thank you, Ben.
Yep.
I'm going to wait till everyone else gets in.
Yeah, and we got to see Jackie a little bit. That was a bonus.
Nice.
Okay, I think we're just about getting everyone back. So we're gonna move it right along. And Herb, I'll leave it to your discretion for how much time we have for this last step. We scheduled 15 minutes. We got a little bit behind schedule, not too bad, but feel free to, you know, whatever you want to cut it off. That's great. So just let's hear for now, the reporters just give a summary of your work and discussion in your breakout room. So when we talk about the reporters, just, you know, you're looking at like sharing out the headlines and like the big ideas or really interesting moments that came from your discussion. So I guess we'll start with Lindsay first. Give us the headlines, big ideas. You know,
it might be helpful to scroll down to our answers on there and scroll down.
I'll do that.
So the first thing we did, we went through and discussed what we thought. Some of the things that were just noted was how some of the things that were noted were not capable of being done via remote learning. So there was that challenge. We then started talking about the different themes. One of the big things is we noticed is critical thinking was noted a couple times. We then also got kind of into a discussion of the social skills, which were, you know, emotional compassion versus life skills, things learned that are useful beyond school. Communication we noted, but then there was some subcategories with communications with peers and with adults, written and oral, visual versus social media. We also then got into a discussion about diversity and global awareness. And then for guidance, some of the things, you know, that were mentioned, it was that we might want to look into the differences between responses from educators versus students and families and why some of those differences might be. One of the big things that we talked about was capturing the criticism and noting those. And then the last thing we kind of got into the discussion is how did we end up with the ends policies that we had? And I believe Urban Jim gave us kind of a little bit of background of where we came from that, but maybe look into other ends policies while we're putting this together. So I don't know if that's kind of the gist of which, or if I'm supposed to go over all the themes.
No, that was great. Anything, yeah. And anyone else from that group want to jump in with any final thing that, anything else? But I think that was perfect. Thank you, Lindsay. If no one else from that group wants to jump in, then we'll go to the reporter from breakout group number 2. And I think that was that Dick? Yes, Dick, what is, give us the headlines. Dick, you're muted, and let me know if you want me to share my screen to show you your themes.
What I tried to say was Alex did a great job of synthesizing in a similar fashion what we discussed and some of the principles going forward. So if you could show that, then I can quickly give you the headlines. Essentially, we chose to explore values. We found that all of our lists in one form or another contained much of these values. Some of them were a little bit more detailed. What we tried to do was to synthesize the values and the headline of each sort of thing. Deb is fully prepared to elaborate upon them, but we all have had a general agreement on these values are shared and were reported by a remarkably astute set of commentators who were focused on the true critical questions. In terms of going forward, we recognize that the questions did not lead us to a sense of cost, benefit, and efficiency within the system, which we know matters to our core constituencies. We find that yes, students are both a constituency, but they're also the primary client. And so we wanted to make sure that there was also a degree of follow-up in terms of smaller group sort of statements of where we are in this process and thanking people for helping us to reach where we have. We believe that the process that was engaged the last time sort of impossible until we get to in-person meeting, but you can, as a committee, take the critical themes with the clear understanding that the leaders, facilitators have, and kind of elaborate them and come up with the commonalities. We think that the commonalities should probably be grouped a little bit more as to whom and what these objectives, values appeal, and when they and how they might be articulated for a student body that ranges from eventually pre-K all the way through the 8th grade and beyond. That is my summary.
All right, thank you, Dick. How about group number 3?
Give the rest of the people an opportunity to add.
You guys good? All right, group number, and we're gonna, after group number 3, if we have a little time, we'll open it up for general discussion and feedback. Group 3, Jane, go ahead. And Jane, would you like me to share my screen, or would you like? Okay.
Yes, because I wasn't the recorder. So that's good. Thanks. Okay. All right. So I'll just kind of read through. So life skills. I know we had a lot of discussion about that, whether to what extent is that academic, involving also, you know, balancing your checkbook. Traditional academic skills, including reading, writing, and mathematical skills, was something that kept coming up in everybody's individual responses as well. Virtue education, what we meant here is about like installation of virtues. You know, there was a lot of things, one word mentioned in people's surveys, like compassion, love, kindness, respect, you know, and, you know, we had a whole discussion around what's virtues and spirituality versus psychological constructs versus social, you know, because those kind of things begin to overlap, and depending on research or whatever you read, it gives you an idea as far as like how you begin to place that. Character education, including resilience, grit, determination, persistence, risk-taking. Everybody agreed upon childcare. We were all surprised when we went back to the first assignment. I think all of us were in agreement that the whole thing about childcare came up. We were all surprised by just how important that was. And civic mindedness, socialization, being able to work with others, skills as a team, cooperation, collaboration, preparation for the future. That included things like college education, when you go down through a path of college education, voc tech, or just opportunities in general, health and wellness, and habits of work. We kind of had discussion around these two, going also back into life skills, you know, because it's really hard to tear those apart. Habits of work, let's see, tolerance for cultures and individuals, social justice, and higher thinking skills, including problem solving, creativity, and adaptability. And then recommendations for engagement. Oops, let me pull here. John, I don't know if I can get that to move. Thank you. Providing students with real life skills, managing a checkbook, handling college, personal independence and self-sufficiency. Questions about emphasis on these virtues again, empathy, kindness, sensitivity, and awareness of needs and concerns of others. Being able to address personal needs, participate in community efforts, and be aware of global issues. Schools providing practical services to support parents as they work. I had brought up the thing about evaluating snapshot data because it was my understanding in the training recently that the snapshot report is an annual report that VSBA puts out to look at district performance and board performance, as well as superintendent performance, and that that is guiding data to develop policies. Questions to ask the board: should the community engagement committee plan another board session to further distill this information? We weren't really sure what the next steps should be, or going public. And then again, how to bring forth proposals.
Okay, thank you. And Herb, I'll end my facilitating role here and turn it over to you. And you know, if you want to open up the discussion for a little bit, I would ask if we continue this right now, that we just, any discussion, we consider feedback for this process. Any feedback we could get about what worked about this process, what needs work with this process would be helpful for us to make improvements as a community engagement working group in the future. But I'll leave it to you to open up any further discussion about this, but would appreciate feedback. If we don't have time, I understand.
Okay. Well, I hope everybody was as enthused by the exercise as I was. I think this was really well planned, and I think we accomplished a lot. I would suggest that we at least continue the discussion for another 15 minutes. It isn't quite in the schedule, but I think this is so important that if we don't get to a few other things, so be it. Anybody have any serious problem with spending at least 15 more minutes on this? Don't see anybody. Okay. Could we maybe begin with the last question that Jane reported, which is, should there be another board meeting about this? Should the Community Engagement Committee distill and come back to the board? And I forget what the third possibility was. My own thought, at least out of our group, was I think we were tending toward asking the committee to synthesize the 3 sets of responses and come back to the board with those, plus some of the items that were from the right-hand side of the purple sheet. Melanie, you had an idea?
Yeah, so I think what I thought might be a helpful way to approach this is by, choosing one of these options, right? Should the committee synthesize these ideas and plan another round of community engagement to get community feedback before we move forward with writing an ends policy would be one idea. The second would be, would you like us to synthesize these ideas and plan a second board engagement activity like this, not the same, but another board engagement opportunity before we start to distill policy? Or would you like us to take back the information we have and start crafting policy to start bringing forth for editing and revision? It seems to me those might be 3 ways to look at the next steps.
Might it be useful just to have Melanie repeat those and do just a sort of a straw poll of hands about what people are currently tending toward favoring?
If you want to look at them, you should be able to go to that page that was up. I seem to have trouble sharing, and it's not Celeste, it's my Zoom settings. But John could probably get there quickly. Synthesize.
If we do that, the trouble is that I don't think we can see our show of hands.
I'm sorry, you're right. Sure. So either the committee plan for another board engagement similar to this, with a next set of goals. The committee could plan another round of community engagement with the synthesized information we get from here, or the board could start crafting recommended or crafting policy that then the next time we meet, we can look at specific policy recommendations and then edit from there.
Okay, so let's go through those one by one. This, you're not pledging this is what you're going to do necessarily, but what do you favor right now? So read them off, give people a chance to raise their hands, and then read off the next one.
Okay, let's start with, do you feel like we would be ready to go? All right, I guess the way I said it, do we want to try to plan another board activity once the committee has synthesized this information? That would be a further deep dive.
Yeah, so we vote.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think I'm getting 7 maybe.
Mm-hmm. The next would be if we would like to take this information, synthesize and plan another round of community engagement, maybe a further survey, letting people know where we're at.
Hands up on that one. 1, 2. I think I'm seeing 2.
3, I see, Jane.
3, okay.
And not to say that might not, maybe we do the board and then still go back to the community. And the third option would be to go directly to taking this information and crafting sample policies that the board would then start pulling apart.
Okay, hands up on that one. I see 1 maybe. Okay.
I feel fairly strongly that the second option could easily be the follow-up step, because we felt fairly strongly that we need further community feedback. But if we don't offer them effective community feedback, then we don't know whether we're barking up the wrong tree. We also need to thank the public for what they gave us to start.
Dave?
So the reason I went straight to step 3 was because I'm assuming that all the key issues that need to be raised and need to be mentioned have been raised. And we've had 600 responses, and we've got a whole wide range of perspectives. So let's take those perspectives and see how they winnow down and distill into some basic policies, and then take those policies back to the people at that point and have them react, because people do better with they have something solid, something concrete to look at, rather than I think we've gone beyond the open-ended, and we can start looking at specifics and then winnowing them out. That'll give us a different set of data, a useful set of data. That's why I went with 3.
John?
Yeah, one thing we could do too, and I don't think this is kind of separate than those recommendations, or maybe parallel to, is to report back to the community, some report of what we found. And there's a path here where we had this qualitative, all this qualitative data, and if we put them into these different buckets, the community engagement group could essentially tag, if we come up with the themes, we could tag each of the responses, and then we could create some quantitative data saying, here's how prevalent, this is what the community said about, how the prevalence of responses as far as, socialization or whatever it may be. So, I'm envisioning a possibility where we could show, like, here's what the community and their responses valued regarding these different themes. And we could also include, maybe little quotes from there and give back to the community something. Hey, here's what you said. Here's our distillation of it. And that is separate than how we will use that to inform the, and say, like, we're going to use this to inform our work. That's.
Anybody want to comment on the distinction John just made there? I happen to agree with it, but Melanie?
I would only add that I think we could also, send that out and just offer an opportunity to say, is there anything you think we missed that is really important, so that there is still an opportunity to respond to that. But I love that idea of reaching back out and letting them know we're working on this.
I see some folks nodding in agreement. Jeff.
You're muted.
Sorry about being muted. The only question I guess I have at this juncture is, when you look at some of the reading that I've been doing, for instance, in this little Bible here that we're supposed to read about policy governance, virtually all the examples of end policies that I've seen in this little text speak to, as part of them, cost efficiency. So I guess my question would be, if we don't have anything coming from the community engagement process that speaks to cost efficiency, can we still add that to our ends policy? Do we need to have a survey that deals with the organizational operation from the broader perspective of the school district and how it operates, or not? And if we don't need that, if we're just looking for values associated with education, I would hope we could still add something when we develop our final ends policy that speaks to cost effectiveness and efficiencies.
Okay, comments, and let's restrict them right now to what Jeff just said, because it's very important. We'll come on to other topics later. Any comments on what Jeff said? Jane?
For what it's worth, and I know this is one of the things I brought up about the annual snapshot, and it was new to me to be learning about, but it speaks to Jeff's concern, which is investment priorities is one of the 5 domains that the AOE looks at in evaluating the performance, or suggests for the performance of how you evaluate for superintendent and board performance. And my understanding is when I looked at our 2019, I looked at the AOE's snapshot for our district. And that is the one domain that we achieved back on that data. Our other domains were we either have no information available or we're failing. So I think we're good in that way, in my opinion, Jeff.
Oh, I think we are. I'm not arguing that. But I think what I'm saying essentially is that the board is the bridge between the owners, the community, and the operational aspect of the organization, i.e. the superintendent. And that if we don't have anything in the ends policy associated with cost effectiveness, how are we giving direction to the superintendent associated with that? And I'd be happy just to put it in at our own volition. But I'm saying, could one argue that we shouldn't put it in because we never solicited opinion from the community? I mean, I'm fine if we feel that it's sort of a given that it needs to be there. But I just wanted to raise it, considering that we have this community engagement discussion going on.
Jim and then Ben.
Yeah, I just kind of want to point out our old ends policies in the introduction, got into providing, all of these things at a cost that is, an attractive cost for the community. And I think, that kind of has to take back seat. And I think we end up saying that our going to the community, our community engagement on the cost effectiveness is really the budget. That's when, that's when we really ask the community whether or not we've got it right on the financial side. But I think, it's because the ends policies, to me, they really want to be focused on what do we want to provide for the kids, but with the overarching statement that it has to be provided at a reasonable cost the community can support. So yeah. I kind of like that approach. That's all
Well, can I respond to that? Can I respond to that?
Yeah, then Ben.
I don't want to get into debate, but I'm sorry, Ben. But again, I think most of the end policies I've read have something in the effect of cost efficiency in the statement of the ends policy itself, just so people are aware they get a bang for their buck. And that's what it's all about. But we're also giving direction to the superintendent who has to make decisions based on the Bible, i.e. our policies. And if nothing's in there about a certain amount of efficiency or cost efficiency, then, could he or she at some point in the future rightfully say, well, it's nothing that's a priority conceivably. So I'm just saying, I think it is important to have something to that effect in our ends policy.
Ben?
Yeah, I'll be quick because I think we've got other things to talk about, but I think that's a great question, Jeff. And I think it's data that we don't have that we should get. Is like, what does the public actually, right. And we have one data point is, did they vote to pass the school budget? And that's not a very good data point because it doesn't tell us if they're willing to pay more or if they want to pay differently, or have different things, whatever it is. We get different feedback in other ways informally, but I think it would be great to be asked those questions of our community.
Right, I agree.
Jane?
And as it relates to all this, I just really think looking at, as a board, us getting educated about the snapshot, I think is going to be really helpful because it goes directly to what Jeff is speaking about, where you have assessment of data and you develop policy to affect that. And the demographics from it are real. There are real numbers of our district. I think we need to pay as much attention to that as we are the community engagement equally.
Okay, we did that sort of straw poll and it looked like 7 of the 10 people who gave of the 11 who gave an opinion thought that the next step would be for the community engagement committee to synthesize what the 3 different groups came up with and come back to the board. Has anybody changed their mind significantly on what they think the next thing ought to be? So let me ask the community engagement committee, is that good enough guidance for what you do next?
Yes, I think so.
John, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And just a little comment, maybe it's unneeded commentary. I'm just trying to really think about where the direction we're going. I think it's great, and I think great discussions. But in an effort to boil things down and distill them to an ends policy, when you boil things down, you should only have the good, flavorful stuff left. And I don't want to boil things down to where it's watered down. And I'm just really like, how do we do this in a way that we're not just left with some boilerplate ends policy that is just really, meaningless in its in how it's watered down. So that's what I'm wrestling with.
I was afraid you were going to say you were going to boil it down till we got a sticky mess in the pan or something. Lee?
I just wanted to get back and reiterate my support for what John originally said about the Community Engagement Committee getting information back out to the community. I don't know whether they need to write that and bring it back to the board for our approval before they send it out. I don't know the details of that, but so we have to get that out. And I think that just, them focusing on having another board activity just delays that, and we need to move that along a little as fast as we can, because they put a lot of effort into this.
I know a couple of hands are up, but let me just ask this question. How do folks feel about, at least by our next meeting, deciding what the Community Engagement Committee concluded gets communicated to the public?
Wait,
Jane, excuse me, I think Melanie was up, and then Deb.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I'm confident we could achieve both plan and activity and create a sample of what we'd like to put out to the community, so that at the next meeting, and please correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but so that the next meeting, you can expect a engagement from us, and you can expect a sample of or proposal for how to reach out to the community.
right. I was going to say that Bob Niles sits on our committee with us, and he has lots of good ideas about just how to do this. So we'll be relying on Bob to help us with this.
Is that okay with everybody to leave it at that for tonight?
Ben
Ben?
had his hand up.
Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, on the community engagement group as well, and I'm supportive of that. I think we can do both. And I think just I'm going to cut my other thought off and leave it at that, so we can just follow this as a group. But I think there's some work to be done and this may be part of our board work, but to explain out what we mean by the boiled down words that are in our final ends policy. And I think that's really important, that we do a good job of communicating out what we mean in those words that otherwise could seem like watered down bland, unless we put something behind it. So I think that's future work for us.
All right, well, let's look forward to that for next month. And I think we can probably all join in thanking the Community Engagement Committee for having put this evening together.
Thank John for that.
Okay.
Herb, real quick, do we have to vote to engage, to give the community engagement permission, I guess, or approval to bring a activity forth next week or next meeting?
Well, I think it depends on what the activity is. I would say if it's something that has to be prepared for ahead of time, it'd be nice to have some idea of what we're agreeing to do, wouldn't it?
Well, I think, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think what we could follow, the process we followed last time was good. I think where we had the community engagement group meet, we came up with it, and then one of us, or I did last time, maybe it could be someone else, or I'm happy to do it again, met with the executive team and and then that seemed pretty good. And one more additional comment here. If we think of this report that we bring back to the community as another opportunity to engage the community, with our findings and say, hey, we need your help. What are your blind spots? What are our blind spots here? If there are any, and think of it less as like a final destination as maybe this report, whatever it may be, as a working paper, a living, breathing document that's updated. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Yep. All right. let us move on to the next item then. And I know we're behind schedule, but I think it was for a good cause. The executive limitation policy 2.0, it's packet page
13.
I think somebody said 13.
Yes.
And does anybody see anything that either shouldn't be there or is missing?
Right.
Go ahead, Dick.
I would move, as we have in the past with respect to these things, to approve the interpretation by the superintendent of policy 2.5.
Okay, motion by Dick Dale to approve the superintendent's interpretation, seconded by Dave Chandler. I assume that's what that was. Yep. Any discussion? Ben?
Trying to find the line where I saw it, but this was in let's see that the successors would meet with the superintendent on a monthly basis and keep notes of those meetings, I think is in here somewhere.
It is. I think it's toward the very end.
It's evidence, I think, or at compliance. Yeah, compliance RD. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so I was just curious what records would be. I'm just thinking about the number of, the reality of Randy of whatever your meetings are with your successors. I imagine they're frequent, and to be expected to keep detailed notes of those meetings would be quite onerous, but evidence perhaps is something different. So I just didn't, I don't want to create more, vastly more. I think
So
it's accountability is
really
important, but vastly more paperwork than necessary. The
Your
language.
question really is how extensive do the records have to be?
Yeah.
So that's a good question. It doesn't in any way, I wasn't thinking about quantifying the number of records. But the idea is that, for instance, right now we've had a weekly cabinet meeting that happens, and the folks who would be identified as emergency successors are already a part of those regular meetings. So in my mind, and we've been doing those for years. So with Jackie, for years, and it's a kind of now become almost a systemic practice. So my thought was that within that, and we keep a running agenda for that. So for the year, the agenda runs annually. So from my perspective, the idea of having those meetings, adding a more specified agenda item weekly about kind of important succession items and documenting it is a very easy way to assimilate this into a practice that we already have in place. So that was the thought process, which you wouldn't know, but I tried to capture here and allow the flexibility for whoever came in, whatever their style was. So I don't know if that helps or not.
Any follow-ups to that by anybody? Okay. Just to help Randy when she comes up with future interpretations of other policies, I personally thought that there was nothing wrong with the interpretation of the policy, but I wasn't sure how necessary it was. I wonder whether anybody else thought that some of the wordings really didn't need to be interpreted.
Because
Dick, go ahead.
Because this is the first go at this, I think because the interpretation is not likely to change a great deal absent a different kind of experience, I think the first time through, we should probably state the obvious. We're about to do this with respect to board policies. All three of those policies are kind of pretty clear, but we ought to have an interpretation.
Anybody else on the subject of the, see, I don't believe we voted on the motion. We're still having discussion. Anybody else want to speak to Dick's motion? Not seeing anybody. All those in favor of the motion, would you please raise your hand? Anybody opposed, please raise your hand. Anybody abstaining, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously. And the next item is the update on the superintendent evaluation process, which is in writing on packet page 16. And I think the only thing we would be doing here is asking Jim Salzgiver or our other BRSU board reps if they have questions about this, if people have any.
I have a question.
Deb.
I have a question, Jim. Does the BRSU have a retreat, or are you talking about each of the local retreats?
It's really the local retreats. We're going to have to, and we have to work that out because Win Hall hasn't really had quite a retreat. So we do need, I think, once a year, we want to pull everybody together in some way, shape, or form. We haven't figured that out yet.
And there was another hand. I've lost track of who's. Jane, go ahead.
Jim, or maybe even Randy, is this a place where, I mean, like I said, I went to that snapshot workshop and I found it really helpful. And I wondered, it sounded like it's being recommended that boards and superintendents consider using the snapshot for evaluation of itself and as it relates to development of policy. So I'm just wondering, does that fit in here?
We set up a subcommittee to design the evaluation policy. That's already undergoing at this particular point. So we've kind of gone beyond the snapshot purview and decided that this is the method that we were going to use.
So is the data, just so for my own learning as well, I think it's relevant information, is the domains that are mentioned in the snapshot that represent our district's demographic information, is that somehow captured in elsewhere in the evaluation?
Randy?
So I'm happy to talk about the snapshot because it's really important that the information that you have as a board is accurate. But the snapshot, what data you evaluate me on is going to be based on the ends policies that you develop. So you as a board identify what those metrics are that matter to you as a community, and those may or may not be measured by the state annual snapshot. And so that's how the process works, is that there's this loop of ends policies, the goals that I establish in the work that we're doing, and performance toward meeting those goals. And whatever metrics I've shared with you we're going to use to measure what you've told me you value and what you want us to do will be used. So you can't talk about the measure before you know what it is you're measuring. And because the state's identified a certain number of metrics as important doesn't mean that you as a board are going to. So I have to make those decisions, and all of it will be shared as we engage in the kind of annual evaluation process loop and growth towards achieving the goals. And I'm happy to talk about the snapshot at my report and add in some information to help clarify stuff for board members.
How about if Randy does that for the next month's meeting?
That would be great.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not opposed to somehow appreciating the fact that it can be captured elsewhere or that the board is looking elsewhere. But I just thought there was a lot of information that came out of it that was relevant to the discussions we've had.
Excuse me, if Randy addresses that next month, would that be okay with you, Jane?
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I just make one comment, just because if people are looking at it, I do want you to know that there is not a shred of accurate evidence from the BRSU or any of our schools in there. So before you jump in and start looking at it, you just need to know there is not one accurate data point in there for our organization, which is why I haven't talked to you about it, because I'd like us to be talking about something that is accurate.
Lee and then Melanie.
I guess I have a newbie question. It's my understanding that the BRSU board employs Randy. So why is this even coming up in front of us?
Really, it is the BRSU board is made up of members from all the different boards. It's on here as a discussion item because we want you guys to be aware and to be able to provide any input. It was on Meadowy had a board meeting last night and there wasn't a lot of discussion, but we want to give people the opportunity to you're represented on the BRSU board, but still we'd like to hear from everybody. We'd like everybody to be aware of what the process is.
Right, and be aware of how our input as a TNG board plays into what the BRSU does. Melanie, go ahead.
I think Randy pretty much captured it. I mean, I'm here looking at the snapshot and it still has Jackie Wilson as our superintendent until 4/1/2021. And the metrics here are not things that we talk about often. So yeah, I'd love to hear some feedback from Randy comparing the snapshot versus, or whatever it is that you think we should know, so that when we do look at the snapshot, we're looking at it from with open eyes.
Anybody else on the superintendent's, on the evaluation process? Okay, the next item is the superintendent's report, which begins on packet page 17. Anything you want to call our particular attention to, Randy, or things that have happened since you wrote this?
There is so much going on. There is just so much going on. We are going to be, I guess I want you to know that I know time is of the essence this evening. We are actively involved in our reset planning work, and that work itself is driving us to really, really deep conversations about all of the areas that are identified in the work, and it's challenging us intellectually and it's challenging us procedurally, and I am incredibly excited about the work. This is the stuff that I really love, that I haven't had an opportunity to focus on this year. So, at some point, maybe it's next month or, as we work over the summer, I will be sharing with you a lot of information about where we are as an organization, what we've learned. And it's exciting to see people really doing some fantastic work. I just want to share this. I don't know if you knew this, and frankly, I don't know that I captured in my report, but part of what we decided this summer was that it really, frankly, was sort of something that was very important to me, and I spent some time figuring out if we could do it. And I may have mentioned it last month, but I wanted to pay for a week of camp for any kid in our community to attend a local day camp. And so we hit the ground running, partnering with any local camps who would partner with us. And if families, we created a form that we sent out to families, working with the camps that are partnering with us, and saying to families, hey, if you want to go to another camp, they're not on the list, we're happy to talk to them. And this week I've started hearing from schools about kids that are attending camp this summer who have never gone before or wouldn't have ever gone before. And I'm really happy about that. It feels good to know that we're giving our students experiences that they wouldn't have been able to have. And I just want to share that because I feel good about that. Our schools are working really hard on summer programming. I'm meeting with them tomorrow. Met with our food service director today, trying to figure out how we're going to run breakfast and lunch where we can all summer long. And just the urgency and the pace and the intensity of the work as people are preparing is pretty powerful. And we're wrapping up the year. We're doing SBAC testing and iReady testing, and we'll be looking carefully at all that data. I am anxiously awaiting when we have enough information that I can begin to get a sense of what actually happened this year. I'm really hoping to have that for your June meeting, but I may not. So, just a little bit more in depth in all of that. There's definitely a lot happening, and we're doing a terrific job as far as, I think, the work happening in our classrooms and our schools. People are starting to, there's just really cool projects and opportunities for kids happening in our classrooms right now. And, it's a lot, it's heavy, it's been a long year, but they're ending well. So.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments about the superintendent's report?
Go ahead, Mel.
Ben, your hand up, and then John. Ben, go ahead.
I like this. Oh, I'm sorry.
I thought Mel was
Ben, go ahead.
going first. Okay. I just wanted to express gratitude, and was thinking, this was following up on our comments earlier about wanting to get out to the community some communication about what we've been doing with the community report. And I was thinking there's another letter that's due to the community from the board, just in recognition and gratitude of all of the staff in the Taconic and Green for their work through this really unprecedented year. And I think it would be really nice for us to do coinciding towards the end of the school year. So I don't know if anybody, is feeling like they're a great wordsmith. We can task that off, but I think that would be a really important thing for us to do as a board.
I agree.
John? Then Melanie?
Yeah, so, educators understand or talk about summer regression a lot. And I love the summer camp, that all kids can have the opportunity to go to at least 1 week of summer camp. And I just wonder if it's an opportunity for us to, or for you guys, for us to measure the effectiveness of, of more enriching summer experiences on learning. And I don't know if there are metrics out there, but we know, research says that summer regression happens to all students, but especially there's greater summer regression in learning for socially economically disadvantaged students. And maybe there's, I don't know. It would be great to have the evidence where we can say, like, these we know summer experiences are important for learning even in the school year. And be great for us to have that evidence. Maybe we can build some long-term programming.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll think about that, John, because I think it's a great question about how might we measure, regression this summer as compared to other summers, especially after a year like now. But hopefully we're able to offer also expanded programming in the summer of 2022. And so we might be able to look at a couple years, and we can go back. It's going to be tricky, but I think we can look at it. We're also, as I believe you all know, offering greater expanded summer programming at our schools. So it will be hard to isolate one specific factor, but everyone will have access to more than they've had before. And I'm hopeful that does make a difference. So I'll think about what we might capture now and then capture in the fall.
Melanie?
I was just going to reiterate what was just said. So I will just say thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the superintendent's report? Okay. We have 3 board management delegation policies well, let me turn it over to those folks who are in charge of that. Dick?
We started with probably the 3 easiest to interpret. They're kind of, I believe, relatively straightforward. We agreed as a committee that we would articulate what does it mean, and then how to measure the compliance. But for all 3 of these policies, measurement has to do with reports of violations of what we're about in one form or another. So I don't think this should take very long, but it does begin our process. If the process is not a good one from the board's perspective, then the policy committee will come up with a better after your feedback. policy. It is our intent to try and bring back any kind of controversy resolved with a proposed interpretation, or what does it mean in subsequent meetings. So if, without further ado, the board's sole official connection to the operational organization's achievements and its conduct will be through the superintendent of schools, I think that's fairly straightforward. I don't think it, and it really depends upon our continued trust in the superintendent. Any additional comments about what does it mean?
I don't see any. Jim.
Yeah, just a quick, I wasn't sure whether, you know, I don't think it's an issue, but, you know, the question, there are a couple of items that per law we have to get involved in, you know, things like some of the hiring decisions, things like that. And I don't know whether we need to sort of try to make sure we accommodate those in either this or one of these policies.
Seems to me that what Dick just quoted doesn't negate that duty. It just says it has to be done through the superintendent, but maybe somebody else has a different view.
I think this policy is sort of, excuse me.
Oh, go ahead, Deb.
This policy is sort of just the introduction, the title of the section. The meat of the policies come in the next two, which would be a good place to discuss that question.
Just to make sure I understand what the policy committee wants us to do here, looking just at 3.0, which is on packet page 20. Is your question for us? Are you asked whether you're asking the right three bold-faced questions, or what exactly do you want us to do with it?
It's the policies as they unfold, as we consider them in subsequent board meetings, will have words in them and much more detail. And it's at that point that we're going to have to be much more finite in terms of kind of presenting and discussing what the policies are going to be. 3.0 is relatively straightforward.
Right.
Okay, so what, just looking at 3.0, okay, go ahead, Melanie, sorry.
Though, do we need to define how it is that we will measure our compliance with this?
Well, I was going to go to that next, but
okay.
Yeah, well, why don't you do that?
Measure the compliance by reports from the superintendent, with respect to questions by the board, with respect to the budget as we unfold and try to understand it, with respect to the various monitoring reports that the superintendent comes up with, periodic updates by the superintendent with respect to operations, with respect to curriculum, and obviously with received public complaints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that a recommendation you're making?
That was
Dick,
what
about
I
how
as ways of measuring it, and unless somebody wants to materially disagree, we could then synthesize this.
So is this something, what you just read, Dick, answering Melanie's question, is this something that you would be coming back to another meeting with for our approval?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. Melanie, does that answer your question?
yes.
Okay. And the same process applies to 3.1 and 3.2, is that right?
Right.
Yeah. And what does it mean? It means essentially the policy is unity of control, and we work as a board rather than individuals, funneling all requests for information through the established process, which is through the chair, and or by formal board vote requesting information.
Right. Right. I have a question about the implementation of this.
Go ahead.
if we, uh, if a board member is not observing these restrictions and is interfering, does it put the superintendent in a spot to be the only person to report that to us? I mean, should we specify to whom does the superintendent report it and in which way? Because it seems to me if someone is, we don't have that problem now, but I've served on school boards where it does happen, where, we have school board members who do try to do all those things. To whom does, what kind of spot do we put the superintendent? What's our procedure for dealing with that? And how do we measure that if it's happening? I mean, does the superintendent just tell the chair?
That is in other places,
Yeah.
exact procedure that we outline in subsequent policies, that the superintendent reports that directly to the chair or another board member who reports it to the chair. And it's the chair's responsibility to monitor that.
But we should specify
that's
that.
in fours.
Yeah, but we should specify that. We should.
But that's outlined in the fours, in a policy in the fours.
Right.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I think it's already there.
Okay.
Anybody else have any comments or yes, let Jeff.
Yeah, now I have a little time on my hands. I was looking at Winooski because they have a full set of policies, and their 3.1 and 3.2 are the same as ours. And they have a section on interpretation as well as evidence. So I sent that to Celeste and Randy just before the meeting, but it may be helpful. You may not want anything in their policy board folks, but it may be helpful if Celeste could just simply send it on to the policy folks so they can take a look at it. There may be something to pick from there.
Perfect.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
With board approval, we're discussing that. Can we have board authorization to ask Randy to do that?
I think we can all agree with that, can't we?
I made a mistake by asking Celeste to do it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's tricky to know when you've overstepped, well, what do we think? Was it reasonable for Jeff to do that or not? What would our policy say to that? I mean, that's a judgment. What do you think?
I should be censored. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's actually pretty funny to get down to the nitty gritty of even sending out board agendas and recommendations.
So how we measure compliance, complaints by the staff or superintendent, and knowledge of people not working through board votes and through public session. If that gets revealed, that's where that information would surface.
Mm-hmm.
Dick or people on the committee, anything else you want from the whole board regarding 3.0, 3.1 or 3.2 at this point?
Again, I suspect that the Winooski stuff that Jeff, you've got will probably be more articulate than me, and we'll bring it back to the board for final approval.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Am I missing any hands here?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Winooski's been at this for a while, and we're just new at this, so we could learn from their example.
All right. Anything else on this topic? Going once, going twice. All right.
Next one, much more complex.
Yep. Legislative update is on packet pages 24 through 26. It's by Jim. Anybody have any questions for Jim or alerts about things that the legislature is doing that will affect us? Jeff.
Jim, do you write this?
Yeah.
Excellent job. Very well done. I don't see why you aren't given a byline on this though. Definitely. You deserve it.
Yeah.
I'd ask Randy to have Celeste do it now.
There are two things that, this is constantly changing. And, one of the things we discussed last time, S100, which was the meals, that seems to be, that still does have a life. Interestingly, they couldn't figure out how to pay for it, so it kind of died for a while. Then the feds came in, the U.S. U.S. Department of Agriculture, and said the feds are going to pay for meals next year too. So suddenly S100 had another life because they're pushing it forward with right now. They're including this a couple of different places, but that's continuing to be pushed forward with the school districts being charged with paying for breakfast after the Fed stopped paying for it, and then with a study committee looking at moving that to all meals. So that's still a financial issue for us in the future. We may want to pay some attention to it. And then there are something else that I didn't include in there, which is there are a couple of lawsuits that are very significant from our perspective in the state of Vermont right now. One with respect to religious schools and paying tuition, and the other with respect to school choice and paying tuition everywhere. And those are pretty significant. We can, David and I are on the VSBA board, and we've had a presentation, and we've got a board meeting tomorrow night, and we'll have more info on that. But these the intent is to one, have school districts like ours paying tuition to religious schools that some of which we don't right now, the whole church and state. And then that one is a bit less concerning than the one where people are saying folks in any district should have the right to tuition their kids to other than your public schools, even when you operate public schools. So those are things that we should just all be aware of, and I may try to provide some info on that as well down the road, because those are things that could really have a significant impact on a district like ours.
Thank you. David, you had your hand up.
I did. I don't want to slow down the process, but I was going to ask Jim, I'm a little concerned about the universal free school meals, because if the federal government funds it, at some point they'll stop funding it. And so
Yep.
then what happens then? Do we have to continue it? And so we're stuck with something that we're not able to handle, but we got grandfathered into it, or can we stop it? I know in principle we want to continue it. We want to be able to do it, but it just seems like it's very dangerous, slippery slope for us to get into if the feds fund it for 2 years and then say goodbye.
Yeah, well, the feds are funding it for next year, which to me, again, that was the doing all, breakfast and lunch, all the meals was going to be $24 to $40 million, which would be charged to the school districts. And when they said that was too much money, they couldn't figure out, they went to just breakfast. So S100 still has just breakfast that would cost the Ed Fund $8 million a year. And, even that was on hold until the USDA said, we'll pay it next year. So they went full charge ahead with the bill that says 8 million. And interestingly, there's another bill in there, 106, which is the community schools bill. They decided to put the study about whether or not, how they could provide all meals free. They threw that into S106 or to H106, which is a, bill on community schools. So they've even split where these things are showing up, but it's, I'd be happy to discuss with anybody, where this stuff stands. I think it has a lot of momentum, and there's a lot of support for providing free meals for everyone, and potentially now in H106, that study on, how could we do this to provide schools or provide meals for, free meals for all kids. They're doing a study which includes looking at what other states are doing. And I think what I've been led to believe is no other states are doing this right now. So, potentially, and I think we're going to want to track, and, if it impacts, the legislature loves to spend other people's money. And this is a case where the USDA is paying for it this year, and then the Ed Fund will pay for it in the future. So, there was a major attempt to push it back onto the general fund, and they hated that idea. So we'll see. It's worth continuing to follow. Sorry.
Ben?
Yeah, I think definitely it's worth continuing to follow, but I think the interesting thing is that there is pretty broad public support for these measures as well, not just legislative support. And there's been a lot of polling done on this, and I don't think it'll come back. And I think this goes to Jeff's question earlier about what does our community actually think about how much they're paying for school. And I think one of the questions is, would they be willing to pay more if it provided these services? And I think when you look at it from an equity perspective, and the way our tax system should work, is that those with the greatest number of resources are paying more for these services in order to support those who have less. And that's what the free and reduced lunch program does, but that's what a universal free meals would do as well. But it would also have a lot of other mental health and community social health benefits by just making it universal for all students. And we definitely know that the learning benefits of having adequate nutrition and food and farm to school, all the rest of it. So I think I do think it's a really interesting piece, and I'd be curious to see what happens.
I think that's where, last time we discussed this, it was clear we weren't going to come to a consensus on this one. And there's a ton of support on, I'm a member of the VSBA executive committee. And on that committee, I'm sort of in minority on saying that I'm concerned about the cost. So, everybody's concerned about it, but everybody loves the idea of providing this to the kids. But, it is the question of how much can we, can we afford it? Do we need to afford it? So,
bearing in mind the time, I'll just take two more comments, Melanie and then John.
I'll be quick. I'll just say on a positive note, you just got bought another year to figure it out so that we can figure it out a year from now and have a plan.
John?
Are we able to, town meeting time next year, have an article or resolution that essentially people would vote on whether they would support such a action? We're not paying for it next year, but could we get a sense through voters, whether they would support this increase to our tax base, a non-binding resolution in the form of an article? I don't even know if we're allowed to do that, but I'm just thinking, how do we start, if this is something that our community supports and is willing to pay more taxes for, then that's something we might want to start figuring out. How do we measure that sooner than later?
It would have to be warned in the education piece, because it's education,
right.
And many of our towns wouldn't have that as part of the town agenda.
I think what John is asking, and I wish I knew the answer, is can we have a resolution that's on the school district ballot?
Yes, that's what I'm asking. Yes.
Yes.
I'm happy to look into it too more carefully if you'd like me to.
Can we move to future agenda items? What, if any, does anybody have? Jane?
Well, I did. But Randy, I appreciate you educating us next time about the, about the snapshot. And I just want to remind folks, being relatively a newbie, that it's really helpful when you're a newbie for people to remember that I don't, like, for instance, sometimes have the benefit of history that you guys have, and so to be educated, about things that you've had privy to in the past, just to remind us. And sometimes even when it comes to a vote or something, I think it can be helpful to give a little bit of information, historical information, especially for us newer folks, because I certainly don't want to be seen as being contrary. I certainly attend the VSBA meetings to learn, and to try to bring that to the board, and certainly not to be controversial or contrary, because I can appreciate, Randy, what you're saying, that that there's other means that the board is using, to evaluate. But it would be helpful for me to, what I'd like to see, if it's possible, is, if you're able to, is to appreciate some of those different domains, like how those other parameters, what other parameters were being used that can maybe that somewhat capture what they're already doing, maybe in the domains, if you're able to do that.
So the agenda will include some comments on the snapshot then. Question maybe for Randy or for Celeste, to help especially new members. Are our meeting minutes word searchable? The ones that are on the BRSU website?
Oh, that's a question for Celeste.
I think so, yes.
I don't know if are the PDF searchable, word searchable though, you think?
Yes.
Okay. So the only thing I
If
just
you wanted to go back and find out what we had done about, let's say, pre-K or lunch, you could try to search for those words, I suppose.
You could. I want to clarify. So we have not, as a board, talked about the annual snapshot because it has never been particularly functional, and it keeps changing, and the data hasn't been clean. So we've got a lot to talk about. I still am trying to get a lot of information, as are other superintendents, about where this is going. I anticipate it might change. I'm just trying to understand from you what you're actually looking for, because I don't expect it to necessarily stay in the form that it's in, and none of our data is accurate. And I can give you like a broad overview of what it is, but I would say to you that at this point, it is not the best use of your time, from my perspective, to spend a lot of time talking about it. It's likely it's not even going to look the same next year, and it's likely that it won't have updated information on our district for data that's in there now ever. So I'm happy to go in as far as you want, but I also want to be very transparent with you that I don't know that, in my opinion, it's a great use of your time right now. So just tell me what you'd like and I will do it.
Let me make this suggestion, and given the fact that it's almost 9 o'clock, would it be all right if Jane sent me a proposed agenda item saying what she would like to know about the snapshot, and then when the executive committee meets to set the agenda, we can try to work that in? Would that be okay with you, Jane?
That's great. Thank you.
Ben.
Ben.
I'd just like to put out there again, consideration of a district equity policy along the lines of the one recommended by the Vermont School Board Association. It's policy number C29 in their model policy booklet. So.
Okay, so, can the minutes reflect that that's one item that should be on the next agenda?
Yes.
Great. And Jane, and then Melanie.
I guess I'm a little confused. First of all, Ben, I'm glad it's there, but I just want to say that I've been trying to get this as an agenda item for quite a while, so I'm not quite sure where the communications are.
It now will be, okay? Melanie?
I think I can probably save my comment towards when we speak about this at the next agenda meeting.
Okay. Other agenda items. I have one thing that I guess we should start thinking about, which is under what circumstances are we going to go back to meeting in person? Is that
Well, if we're-
something we're ready to talk about when we meet in June? Jane, and then Randy?
I think a lot of times it's reasonable if people, I mean, if people are comfortable enough to say, I think with vaccination, and wearing masks, that a lot of times that is a recommendation.
I think we should put it on the agenda to talk about next meeting.
Okay, Melanie says put it on the agenda. Randy?
Do you want to wait? At this point, we don't have the ability to meet in person yet. Like the AOE hasn't given guidance around that. We haven't allowed us to be able to do that. So I don't know if you want to wait to put it on until after you have information from the AOE.
How would it be that we put it on the agenda once the AOE has given the green light? Okay, everybody?
I'm trying to push for that. So we'll see if anything is accomplished this month, but I'd like them to try to start talking about it.
John,
It would be really nice if that could happen before we have the annual retreat. Melanie?
could I offer that it just gets put on the agenda every month? And if we don't have that, we don't move forward with the discussion. I kind of feel like it might be just to save us that time. If we know that as soon as the AOE gives us that permission, we don't have to have that follow-up conversation. We could jump right into in-person meetings if we've already decided that upon AOE approval, we're doing that. So if it's on the next agenda, then we wouldn't have, say they announce it the day after our meeting, then we have to wait a whole nother month to meet about it and then approve it.
I think that's a good idea. Anybody have any problem with that? Anything else on on future agendas? Let's take a moment to reflect on the norms, which I think are packet page 2. Don't have to read them aloud, but just take a look, see if we behaved ourselves fairly well. And our next meeting is June 1st by Zoom. Is there any other business?
Move for adjournment.
Great. Okay, moved by Dick to adjourn, seconded by Melanie. Was that a second? Yes. Okay, seconded by Melanie. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody opposed to adjourning, raise your hand. Great, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Randy,
Alex.
could you give us a thumbs
you.
up if you're feeling good?
Yeah.